You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood at all. That bike is pathetic, tattered like some piece of junk. And a guy like you isn't even ashamed? With skin that dark, you still dare to show your face around here?" Luke Garrison roared, his hand still on his gun. Marcus Walker quietly parked his faded motorcycle in front of the pharmacy, not responding, not showing fear. 3 minutes later, 50 soldiers flooded in. An officer bowed before Marcus. "We're a bit late, sir." The entire street fell silent in shock. "What state are you living in? I want to know. How far could this story go in a place like yours?" The morning in McRae seemed unchanged. The town remained silent as usual, the harsh sunlight glaring off the old concrete and faded signs. In front of the old pharmacy on the corner, a worn-out motorcycle pulled over and went silent. The man riding it stepped down slowly, his dark shirt soaked in sweat, a faded army cap pulled low over his weathered forehead. He parked the bike neatly by the steps, adjusted the strap of his cap, and stood still. He didn't move or seem confused, just stood there like he was waiting for someone to arrive at the exact right time. A few quiet glances came from the small store across the street. A group of people leaving church paused briefly, hymn books in hand, then passed by more quickly than usual. A young man whispered, trying to hide his irritation, "Weird, no one around here looks like him. Beat-up bike, unreadable face, could be a thief." An older woman beside him said nothing, just tugged him along faster. Marcus stood there like a tree rooted in the sidewalk. His eyes moved across the half-shuttered shops and the faces that turned away. There was nothing lost or fearful in his gaze. It held something else, a deep stillness that didn't belong to someone easily threatened. A white and jewel patrol car crept past, then suddenly stopped just a few meters ahead. Officer Luke Garrison furrowed his brow behind the wheel, reversed, stepped out, sweat running down his tense face. His right hand hovered near his belt, close to his gun. "What are you doing here?" Luke asked, eyes scanning from head to toe. "You know this area doesn't allow motorcycles, right?" Marcus turned his head, calmly. "Waiting for someone I know? Where's your vehicle registration?" Luke snapped, voice rising. "You don't look like you belong here. And that bike?" He leaned in closer. The wheel paint was chipped, the seat torn and patched with black tape, the frame smeared with dirt. To Luke, that wasn't just a bike. It was cause for suspicion. "Old black guys like you riding trash like this?" He sneered. "Did you steal it?" Marcus didn't answer. No flinch, no retreat, just steady eye contact, as if waiting for the next line. It wasn't defiance or weakness, but something harder to define. Luke froze for a second, unsettled. Foot traffic dwindled. Near a cafe, 2 young men quietly pulled out their phones, one starting to record. No one said anything, but the strange stillness of the man and the thickening air drew attention. A hot gust of wind swept through, kicking up dust along cracked sidewalks. The sun bore down heavier, heating the heads of the growing number of bystanders. A middle-aged man stopped with his bicycle. A young woman, clutching a bakery bag, paused as her eyes swept over the cruiser and Marcus's bent figure being examined. "Another one again?" a young man muttered, raising his phone. He didn't speak loudly, but his voice carried. Tongue clicks and head shakes followed. A half-circle crowd started forming around the scene. Officer Luke maintained control, reaching toward Marcus's chest pocket while turning his shoulder in a familiar motion. Not rough, but deliberate, meant to draw attention in the middle of the street. "What's in your pocket?" Luke asked, knowing he wasn't allowed to search without cause. His voice grew louder, more like a performance than a duty. People pulled out their phones, filming every move. Marcus stayed silent, unmoving. His steady eyes held no fear, no resentment. That stillness caught Luke off guard. In those eyes, he felt a cold shift, like he was the one being watched. Across the street, a vegetable vendor near the church adjusted her headscarf and whispered, "Why does he look so calm, like he's waiting for something?" Some people turned away from the cameras. A couple with a child hurried across the road. The rest stayed, not to interfere, but to see where this was going. A young black woman clenched her fist. "This can't keep happening," she hissed. Her friend tugged her back, whispering, "Don't get involved, it's dangerous." Luke stepped back, pulled out his radio, and his eyes flicked around the now larger crowd. He hesitated, then said, "Requesting backup." suspicious subject showing signs of resistance. At that moment, Marcus spoke, not loudly, but with clarity. "You should call your superior before it's too late." The words sliced through the heat and silence like a blade. The crowd froze. Luke lowered the radio slowly, eyes narrowing. "You threatening me, old man?" he growled. Marcus didn't respond. He shifted his wrist slightly, gaze unchanged, his calm now eerily cold. And in that moment, something shifted. Not footsteps or voices, but a quiet, creeping unease spreading beneath the sunlit dust of McRab. The sudden twist shoved Marcus's back against the motorcycle as Luke's hand gripped his shoulder and slid down into his pocket. The movement was rough, unannounced, and offered no justification. Pressure from the officer's wrist made Marcus's old arm twitch slightly, but he made no sound. His shirt was pulled out of place, and something shifted in his eyes, deeper, colder, as if memorizing every gesture of the man before him. "What's this? License, old as hell," Luke sneered, then chuckled. "Bet this crap isn't even yours, huh?" His voice was loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. Heads tilted, whispers rippled. The middle-aged man near the convenience store shook his head with disapproval. The usually indifferent street was beginning to stir, like a breeze brushing a silent lake. From across the road, the voice of the pharmacy owner rang out sharply through an open window. "Cut it out, Luke. That old man hasn't done anything." The air snapped taut. Luke turned abruptly, eyes scanning the crowd. "Who said that?" He stepped forward. "You want to get arrested for obstruction?" The voice wasn't loud, but it pushed the sidewalk back like a crashing wave. Noise collapsed into an uneasy silence. An older white man nodded slowly and muttered, "This isn't right." Luke caught his glance. The man stepped back, raised his hands in apology, then walked away. Others pulled out phones, backing up to find better, safer angles. No one else spoke, but the number of lenses pointing at Luke was growing. Near the base of a street lamp, a young man was live streaming. He held his phone at shoulder height, his face tense. When Luke noticed, he moved in, voice low and biting. "Turn it off. You want to be charged?" The boy froze, lowered his phone. Mouth moved without sound. His hand trembled, sweat rising on his brow. But when Luke turned away, the boy slipped his phone behind his jacket and restarted the recording silently. Tension spread like an electric shock. Adults pulled their children away. Some turned their backs. Others left. The hint of resistance was quickly crushed by direct threats. The air became so compressed that even the sound of shoes brushing pavement seemed unnaturally sharp. Marcus still stood in the center of it all, surrounded by eyes, yet completely still. Though searched, barked at, shoved, and handled, he stood like an ancient tree, wrapped in the storm's breath. No one dared step in, no one spoke up now, and no one yet understood that the man they watched had not even begun to react. A shove from behind made Marcus's back slip from the bike. His weakened leg slid slightly on the hot road. His body fell like a slow-falling tree, head tilting left, arms limp. No groan, no resistance. It happened in silence, like he had chosen the exact place to land. Luke lunged, knee to Marcus's spine, pinning his wrists behind him. The clink of steel echoed as the cuffs clicked shut. Luke barked, "Cooperate! Don't make me get rough!" His voice rang out in the street, bouncing off windows and doorways. A woman near a stroller gasped, hand over her mouth. Inside the bakery, a child began to cry, the sound rising through the cracked open door. A man still filming whispered, "This'll make the news." Marcus lay on his side, cheek on the pavement, dust clinging to his skin. His eyes remained open, not on Luke, not on the crowd, but staring at the slice of sky above two rooftops. Through the narrow gap between two old buildings, sunlight cut down like a silent blade, slicing across his gaze. In the stillness, someone said they heard an engine, distant, hollow, like it echoed from a place time hadn't reached. Luke bent down, rifled through Marcus's pocket, and pulled out an old leather wallet, cracked, faded, with seams fraying. Inside were torn papers, a worn-out license, and a tarnished brass badge. Luke held up the badge. scanned it quickly. The letters were smudged, the symbol dulled by years. Nothing familiar, nothing that made him pause for more than a second. "Legal?" he scoffed. "Fake ones look just like this." Marcus said nothing. His eyes stayed open, unblinking, even as dust and wind blew across his face. His lashes twitched, but his pupils stayed still. It wasn't an empty stare. It was a gaze that already knew the outcome, a gaze that had seen lies draped in uniform, that had walked corridors more suffocating than war zones. And now, face down on the street, what he left behind wasn't a cry but silence, heavy as stone. A breath passed, then another. The whole street felt suspended. Some turned away, others clenched their fists. Some bowed their heads not out of fear but from seeing something broken too clearly, and everyone felt one truth. Something was wrong, and the man on the ground was not alone. A young black woman with long curly hair still held her phone tight, leaned toward the person beside her, whispering, "Why isn't he afraid?" No one answered, because none of them truly understood what Marcus was seeing. His face, layered in dust and time, remained composed, his eyes fixed on the sky, not with defeat, but with the calm of a man counting down, waiting for truth to rise from where no one thought to look. A heavy rumble echoed from the far end of the street, like a low guttural warning from deep underground. Each rotation of metal grinding against the asphalt sent a jolt up the spine of anyone listening. The pavement began to tremble lightly. Pebbles scattered along the curb vibrated and shifted with the growing hum of engines. The thick, stifling air tore open as the crowd stirred, heads turning toward the sound. Eyes filled with confusion and unease. A man at the newsstand leaned forward, his voice cracking. "What the hell is that? Military police?" No one responded, but phones were raised once again. Cameras pivoted toward the street's end, where shapes of massive armored vehicles emerged from the haze of dust. "Those aren't police cars," a woman whispered, her voice low enough to chill. "That's the military." 4 Humvees rolled into view, sunlight bouncing off their steel frames. A small unit flag flapped gently from the command vehicle's windshield. The lead vehicle bore a signal transmitter, followed by 2 support trucks that veered outward, while the final one held rear guard. The engines growled low, like thunder trapped beneath the earth. Such a scene was unheard of in McRab, especially at midday on a quiet town street. People began backing away, steps faltering, faces clouded with suspicion. A woman shouted from within the crowd, "Is this a war?" Her cry struck like a spark on dry tinder, feeding the smoldering panic. Just meters away, a little girl burst into tears, wrenching from her mother's grasp as the roaring engines grew louder. A nearby office worker dropped his lunch bag, his eyes hollow. He instinctively raised his hands and staggered backward, as if bracing for something catastrophic. The lead Humvee screeched to a halt in the center of the intersection. The brakes hissed dryly, its door flung open. First came the gleam of polished black boots striking the asphalt with a cold finality. Then a sharply creased uniform coat, collar high and buttoned, shoulders bearing clear rank insignia. Captain David Coleman stepped out, silent as a sheathed blade. His face betrayed no emotion, but his gaze swept through the crowd with enough force to make those nearest instinctively part to either side. He didn't need to shout or signal. His presence alone dictated order. "Secure the perimeter, maintain civilian control, lock down the area." His voice rang out with the weight of an order that needed no confirmation. The soldiers disembarked at once, their movements precise, eyes focused. They fanned out fluidly, forming a living barricade between Marcus, still being restrained, and the rest of the street. There were no weapons drawn, no threats issued, yet their mere arrival caused the crowd to retreat in unison. Every step they took carried the authority of relentless training. Their eyes alone conveyed it clearly. Order had shifted, and what was coming was no accident. Luke stepped back, hand clenched on his holstered gun but not drawing it. A vein bulged at his neck as he yelled, his voice cracking with panic and rage. "I'm in charge here. Who gave you the right to enter the civilian zone?" No one answered. The line of soldiers held their ground, expressionless, eyes cold. One soldier stepped forward, tall and firm, each stride silencing the chaos. He said nothing. No explanation was given. As he reached Luke, his left hand moved instinctively, and the right swept behind Luke's back. The steel handcuffs snapped shut with a chilling click that cut through the stunned silence. Luke jerked, struggling against the hold. "Who the hell do you think you are?" His voice shattered like glass thrown against stone. No soldier turned around. His question hung in the air, unanswered and meaningless. On the other side of the human barricade, silence surged like a rising tide. Those filming lowered their phones instinctively. The teens who had first gathered were now frozen, faces blank, eyes darting between the cuffs, the soldiers, and the man still lying on the ground. The vegetable vendor nearby clutched the edge of her wooden stall, eyes wide and unblinking. Boots echoed in a steady rhythm. Captain David Coleman emerged from behind the command vehicle, walking straight past Luke without turning his head. His eyes locked onto the man on the ground. Each step was resolute, as if marching across a battle line, heading toward a single target: Marcus Walker, who still lay on the pavement, eyes fixed on the gray sky above. Coleman stopped right in front of Marcus. With no wasted motion, he bowed slightly, tilting his head with the respect one would show to a man who once held a power that institutions feared. His voice was low, calm, and each word landed with weight. "We're a little late, sir." The words ripped through the air like a blade. No one spoke. All the whispers vanished instantly. Every eye turned to Marcus, the man accused of theft, suspicion, and trespassing. Now being addressed like a former leader, the silence was suffocating, as if the veil of normalcy had been torn away to reveal a truth too large to ignore. Marcus turned his head. His eyes didn't show anger or triumph, only fatigue, like a man who had carried decades of waiting on his shoulders. He looked at Coleman. No nod, no smile, but from deep within his gaze something exhaled, a breath thin as thread, releasing a pressure held for too long. His eyes dropped slightly, then turned toward the crowd. Without a word, without a gesture, everyone stepped back half a pace, and as if caught in a strange chain reaction, a few people lowered their phones. Someone tugged at their friend's arm, as if capturing another second of this moment would be disrespectful. At the very place where he was once humiliated, Marcus now stood to rise within a circle of silence, not one ordered, but one born from the sheer gravity of truth, finally revealed. An officer from the command unit stepped forward, holding a military-grade data device. He stopped in the middle of the street, facing the crowd now glued to the unfolding scene, and spoke in a loud, even voice, each word striking the pavement like a hammer-shattering prejudice. "Identity confirmed. Marcus Walker, Commander 9th Brigade, Special Operations Unit, Middle East to Military. Military ID C-19-831. The air seemed to explode. Those filming froze, hands trembling. A young woman gasped, her eyelids twitching uncontrollably. "What? He's an officer?" A middle-aged man in the back muttered and took a step back, as if realizing he'd just passed judgment on the wrong man. "I thought he was just some drifter." A teenager, live-streaming, turned to his friend, pale-faced, and whispered, "The Middle East? What rank does someone need to have an escort like that?" Marcus braced himself and slowly stood up. His movements were measured, not theatrical. Dust clung to the sleeves of his shirt as he brushed it off with his calloused hands, wiping his pants too, as if shedding layers of long-held prejudice. He raised his head, eyes sweeping over the stunned crowd. His expression was eerily calm, like someone who had seen this moment coming for a long time and was simply arriving at a scheduled hour. On the other side, Luke shouted like a cornered animal. "He's a criminal! He was dishonorably discharged! He stood trial for abuse of power during Operation Ash Lane! You're defending a traitor!" His voice ripped through the air, clinging to the crowd with the last ounce of chaos he could wield. But this time his words were no longer received with the same agreement. Some nodded instinctively, repeating lines they'd read somewhere before. "Yeah, there were reports. He was accused of abuse of authority, but," another voice rose from the crowd, "then why would the military send an entire convoy to protect him if he were guilty?" A black man raised his phone, calmly aiming the camera and speaking into the lens. "A local cop arresting a former international special ops commander? Let's be honest, who's overstepping authority here?" Captain Coleman stepped forward, stopping 2 paces from Marcus. His gaze shifted toward Luke, but his voice was for everyone present. No, he is not a criminal. He was betrayed, and today we are here to correct a mistake the system once made. The words landed like a truth no one wanted to face. Phones were lifted again, but this time not to capture an arrest. This time they documented a reversal. In the eyes of some, Marcus was no longer just a stranger pinned to the street. He was a man who once held a position beyond their comprehension, and the presence of Coleman, along with the 50 soldiers beside him, was irrefutable proof something was wrong, and that wrongness was not in the man now standing and brushing dust off his sleeves. A sergeant approached Coleman, face tense, holding an encrypted military comms device. "Urgent order from the Department of Defense," he said quietly, but in the fragile silence of the moment everyone heard. Coleman took the device, scanned its contents quickly. His face showed no change, but the way he turned around carried an invisible weight that hushed the street. He stepped into the open, voice clear and resolute. Under Provisional Clause 14.7, the United States Department of Defense hereby orders the immediate suspension of all law enforcement actions by Officer Luke Garrison, pending investigation into allegations of serious misconduct and racial discrimination in the line of duty. As the words landed, the entire block erupted. Luke spun around, face red, voice breaking. "No one has the authority to suspend me here. This is McRabb's jurisdiction. I am the law." But his words no longer touched anyone. A soldier stepped forward without waiting for a second order, calmly removed Luke's gun and name badge like completing a cold administrative task. Luke thrashed, yanking his arm away, but was immediately restrained. "I'll sue every one of you. You think you can do this? This is my town. Who the hell are you to take charge here?" His voice faded into meaninglessness beneath hundreds of eyes now fixed on him, not the eyes of civilians respecting an officer, but those staring at a man unmasked and stripped of authority. Some townspeople backed away, then froze like statues, their expressions shifting by the second. An elderly woman clutched her purse, her hands trembling, and whispered like a late confession, "We treated him like garbage." No one answered, but a few lowered their phones, a few eyes dropped, as if ashamed of how easily they'd raised them. Across the street, a young man continued filming, but this time said nothing. He simply typed a caption on the screen. From a man forced to kneel in the street to a special commander falsely accused, McRae owes him an apology. Marcus stood at the center of it all. He didn't speak, didn't chant, didn't defend himself. The wind brushed past his sleeves, carrying off the lingering dust. His eyes held no anger, no bitterness, only something deeper, the weariness of a man who had come too far, who had carried the truth too long, and now watched it finally emerge in the open, slow and painful, like an old wound bleeding again. He turned his head, scanning the crowd. Some avoided his gaze. Some bowed theirs. Others dared not breathe. But no one, not a single soul, dared ask who he was anymore. And for the first time in that long, stretched morning, Marcus stood in the middle of the street without having to prove he was human. The air shattered after Captain Coleman's declaration. "Commander," he said, his voice clear and formal like a military ritual unfolding in a civilian street. The crowd froze for a few seconds, their eyes shifting from suspicion to confusion, then erupted in murmurs. Phones were raised, cameras pointed straight at Marcus, the silver-haired man standing silent like a monument amid the storm of noise. Some people stepped back, eyes wide. Whispers rippled through like waves. Was he really an officer? He commanded a campaign in Fallujah, didn't he? Is this rank even real, or is it staged? A hushed voice said, "I cursed him this morning." The bakery owner, who had once watched Marcus with wary eyes as he parked his bike outside her shop, now stepped forward through the crowd. Her hands trembled as she gripped the hem of her blouse, then suddenly embraced him. Her voice cracked. "I thought you were someone else. I'm sorry, truly. Marcus didn't speak. He nodded slightly, his eyes clouded with the habit of years spent swallowing indignity. A young man, still holding his live-streaming phone, stepped closer, eyes glistening, his voice trembling. Is it really you, the man who commanded in Fallujah? I read about you on a veteran's blog. I thought you were a legend. He clasped Marcus's hand tightly, as if afraid he might vanish in the crowd. Those moments held silent reverence. Not flattery, just a stunned awe tinged with remorse. But that atmosphere didn't last. A group of white men nearby burst into anger. A bald man in a leather jacket shouted, "This is a scam. The military's been infiltrated. He must have bribed his way through the unit." Another added, voice low and ready to explode, "So now, just because he's black, a whole army comes to protect him? Where's justice for us?" The wave of outrage surged. A middle-aged woman holding a small flag screamed, "I raised 2 kids. Both served in the military. No one ever called them commander in the street." Emotions twisted into fury. They didn't see Marcus for who he was. They only saw power being handed to a man they were used to looking down on. The police temporarily withdrew from the area. Luke was escorted away by 2 military men, his face flushed with rage. He tried to look back, shouting above the noise, "He's no hero. He's the shadow of guilt. Everyone will see that." Being dragged off, Luke struggled like a chained animal in a marketplace. Sheriff Raymond Hale finally appeared. He walked through the crowd, his uniform wrinkled from the heat, his expression unreadable. He said nothing to Marcus, offered no defense or judgment. He simply gestured for the crowd to disperse, speaking in a low, steady voice, "This incident is under investigation. Please step back," neither siding nor condemning, as if he too was torn by what he had just witnessed. The entire street buzzed with clashing voices. On one side were praises, tears, awakenings, and delayed respect. On the other hand, rage, resentment, and insults fired off like stray bullets. There was no clear line between right and wrong in the eyes of the crowd. Each person carried their own bias, and now all were being exposed at once. During this chaos, Marcus stood still, silent like the last remnant of an old world just flipped upside down. And in that silence, he knew this was only the beginning. A phone buzzed quietly on a desk. The screen lit up with a message from a classmate. "Is this the guy you told me about?" It included a link to the most watched video on social media. Sarah tapped the screen, the flickering light reflecting in her eyes as the clip began to play. In the frame, Marcus, the man she'd only heard of in quiet stories as a humble veteran, was being pinned to the ground by police. Behind him, military vehicles rushed in, uniformed soldiers stepping out, surrounding him, calling him commander. Sarah's eyes stung as she saw him rise. No justification, no anger, just a calm gaze, as if he had expected all of it. She broke down, tears falling onto the keyboard where she had once typed an essay on implicit bias in law enforcement. But those cold theories now felt minuscule compared to the reality on her screen. That night, Sarah downloaded the full video, re-edited it with parts cut from earlier versions, the footage of Marcus staying silent, being publicly humiliated and then shielded by a unit of soldiers, a living emblem of honor buried too long. She typed in the caption, "My grandfather is Marcus Walker, a man who sacrificed his reputation to protect his team, and today he was treated like a criminal." She added the hashtag Justice for Marcus Walker and hit post. Within an hour, the post went viral. Civil rights groups, veterans, law students, and independent journalists began sharing Marcus's image as a symbol of defiance. Independent media responded first, using language sharper than ever. Law enforcement has failed the most basic test of moral integrity. Meanwhile, major networks reacted oppositely. A conservative outlet ran the headline, "The man protected by soldiers, hero or hidden threat." One evening report even questioned, if he's so innocent, why was he ever disciplined internally? These headlines were walls of doubt, slowing the spread of truth. Sarah continued updating her posts. She cited parts of Marcus's old military file, scanned commendations and excerpts from handwritten letters by former teammates. Her story had become a full-blown confrontation between a granddaughter and a system built to conceal. By midnight, her post had passed 200,000 shares, but attention didn't come without risk. A security warning flashed on her laptop. Your IP address is being monitored. Come February. Moments later, an anonymous email arrived with only one line: if you don't want to suffer the same fate, delete the post. Sarah stared at the words, then deleted the message without replying. She returned to her post, adding just a few more lines. This time it was simpler. I'm no longer writing truth essays. I'm living it. In the quiet dorm room, the screen's glow lit her resolute face. She whispered to herself, now they'll know who he really is. And that was when the first sound came from the stairwell. Truth, once dragged into the light, always demands a cost. But Sarah had chosen to stand on the side of the light. The quiet morning was shattered by the slicing sound of helicopters overhead. An encrypted internal message was sent directly to Captain Coleman's communication device. The command appeared in a clean line. 9th Brigade is to temporarily retreat to base. Cease all civilian operations until further orders. At the bottom, a priority emergency code confirmed that the directive came from the Strategic High Command. Coleman read the message repeatedly, deep wrinkles forming on his brow. He made 3 calls to his superiors. None were answered. The replies he received were cold and automated. No further information, full compliance required. He knew he was being pulled out of the field, not because he had disobeyed orders, but because he was getting too close to the truth. Before leaving the area, Coleman requested a private meeting with Marcus. They stood on the edge of a dusty clearing where the last Humvees were being prepared to depart. The wind lifted fine dust into the air, forming a thin, invisible curtain between 2 men who had once fought side by side. I don't have time to explain, Coleman said quickly, his eyes heavy. He pulled a small hard drive wrapped in insulated cloth from his pocket. This contains some footage from the internal system. If I don't come back, don't trust anyone in command. Marcus didn't ask for anything more. He looked Coleman in the eye and gave a single nod. They shook hands like old soldiers who knew they might never see each other again. Immediately afterward, all of Marcus's connections to the military network were cut. His document access codes were denied, reporting accounts were permanently shut down, and even his wrist tracker locked itself automatically. He tried to reach Coleman again, but only received error signals. The only person he could still contact was Sarah, but her messages became sparse and strange. I'm fine, she wrote, but don't call again. I think my phone is being monitored. News coverage began to shift. Reports that once portrayed Marcus as a symbol of resistance were replaced by features on veteran trauma and post-war instability. A brief article in a military paper described him as a subject of prior psychological rehabilitation following a classified mission, currently unconfirmed to possess clearance for security-sensitive operations. The wording was subtle but sharp, cutting into the public trust he had earned. On underground military forums, anonymous posts began accusing Marcus of being a political agitator, a threat to internal stability, and exploiting his veteran status to incite unrest. Those who had defended him now stayed silent or vanished from the threads entirely. No raids, no arrests. But Marcus understood. This was how they erased a man without firing a single shot. He returned to a small room where he had stored all temporary notes and spread the documents across the table. Every detail, every date, every name was rewritten and arranged chronologically. The official information channels were blocked, but he didn't need them to recall what happened during that mission. What he needed now was to reconnect the most carefully hidden fragment. Who had ordered the silence? Who was controlling the narrative from the shadows? At the top corner of the first page in his notebook, he wrote in bold ink, "If they're pulling out, it means something bigger is being buried." It was both a warning and a beginning. The moment he stopped relying on anyone else. From this point on, Marcus would uncover everything alone. The dark wooden door let out a dry creak as Marcus pried open the lock, sealed since 1998 with an old metal key. The old house sat quietly at the end of a tree-lined street, its roof faded and window frames coated in thick dust. Inside, the scent of rotting wood and stale tobacco lingered, as if time had stood still. His footsteps echoed through the cold, empty rooms, a place that once held the memories of a soldier who returned without a welcome and vanished from society without a trace. Behind a hidden panel in the bookshelf, he found a small wooden box containing complete copies of unit journals, early tactical maps, blurred satellite photos, and hand-drawn sketches of the terrain where the 1997 encounter had taken place. These had once been his personal property, surrendered during a conditional discharge process. Marcus had kept the copies, guarding them more carefully than his own life. He placed Coleman's hard drive on the desk and opened an old laptop disconnected from the internet. The decryption process took nearly 2 hours. The files were locked behind layered military encryption with no readable file answers, just alphanumeric codes in old military formats. Upon reaching the third layer, a message popped up. Internal breach confirmed. Data is being transferred to the conservative political bloc. Do not trust anyone who approved Operation Ray. Below the message was a folder titled Ray RB97, marked with a red lock icon. The folder requested a secondary password, and a warning appeared. 3 incorrect attempts will result in total data deletion. Marcus made a note of it, then closed the laptop. This wasn't the moment to take risks. That afternoon, his phone buzzed with a single message from Sarah. Surveillance system is monitoring your house. The sheriff is being pressured to sign a search warrant. With no time to verify, Marcus wiped the temporary storage, hid the hard drive inside the desk frame, removed the laptop battery, and used an old typewriter to record what he had just uncovered. From now on, nothing would pass through a network. The next morning, just as Marcus stepped out of the corner repair shop after replacing a spark plug on his old motorcycle, a middle-aged man with a sun-scorched face and a limp passed by. He stopped exactly where Marcus was standing, reached out for a handshake as if by chance, and slipped a folded note into Marcus's palm. Then he walked away without a word. Marcus opened the note inside his vehicle. The handwriting was rough and brief. Some of us remember what you did back then. Watch out for Daryl. Nothing else. No signature, no identifiers. Just the name Daryl. Marcus didn't know who he was, which side he was on, or what role he played, but the name was underlined in red in his notebook, filed under indirect suspects or possible infiltrators. Returning home after dark, Marcus looked up and saw a faint red light blinking from a utility pole in front of his gate. A civilian-grade camera was neatly mounted, disguised beneath an electric box. He wasn't surprised. He entered, locked the door carefully, and drew all the curtains closed. On the table lay a terrain map, spread wide, with red arrows marking his unit's movements during the old mission. Handwritten symbols, now only he could interpret, filled the corners. The pale blue glow of the laptop screen lit up the unusually quiet dorm room. Sarah sat at the edge of her bed, hand on the mouse, eyes fixed on the video she had recorded the day Mr. Marcus was stopped by the police. Since then, the footage has been shared hundreds of times, edited and commented on, and has become a heated topic on social media. But today, she was watching it from a different perspective, the perspective of someone searching for cracks. The footage was slightly shaky, filmed in a rush. When she slowed it down to frame 42, she paused. Across the street from where Marcus was forced to the ground, a security camera was mounted on a lamppost. Its lens pointed directly at the scene, but when she looked into the town's public surveillance database, the footage from that exact camera was missing. The equipment's status report marked it as automatic maintenance precisely during the incident window. Sarah opened the device code manager, entered the ID of the camera installed on pole number 8 at the corner of McRabb, Main and Walker Street. Using the access account provided by the university for her public law internship, she entered the town's surveillance portal. Her goal was clear: find out why a front-facing camera went offline at a critical moment. The system's timeline is displayed clearly on screen. Sarah scrolled carefully, scanning each line. Camera 8 had recorded from the moment Marcus got off the bike until the military unit arrived. However, the file only showed download complete. The auto-successor system then issued a deletion command 45 minutes after the recording. No system explanation was attached. The deletion came from a high-level account, anonymous. She knew only core technical members or those with special clearance could issue such commands. Sarah paused, stepped back, and switched to detailed log mode. In the internal notes section, one entry was hidden. She activated the raw viewer tool used by tech students to debug systems. A line appeared in a gray annotation box detached from the main log, processed under protocol M Class 4, Executor R. Keller_9. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. An unfamiliar name, but it appeared inside a restricted sector. She took a screenshot, exported the full logs into an encrypted file, and saved it onto a portable drive. To be safe, she embedded the file in an image inside a PDF document to evade automated scan. In an email to Mr. Marcus, she attached the file with a short message. "I'm not sure what I've found, but this person seems like a link." She didn't elaborate, just sat still, eyes on the screen, a heavy weight settling in. She knew that by following this name she would step beyond the line of a student into a space where regulations bowed to internal protocols. But Sarah also understood. The truth isn't kept in hard drives or in faith. It needs someone to peel back its layers, even if it means confronting those who never show their faces. The dorm room looked the same, but her screen no longer glowed with its usual comfort. She typed quickly, streams of code flying by, R. Keller_9 appearing again and again across internal logs. Sarah didn't stop at the system. She expanded her search into cybersecurity forums frequented by IT students, tracing command trails. After 3 hours, she uncovered a list of technicians once affiliated with the McRobb surveillance system, hidden inside a firmware forum archive. A name appeared, Ryan Keller. The attached note made Sarah pause. Suspended in 2022 for unauthorized access to classified data, but not prosecuted. Rehired under special contract in 2023. She dug deeper. Despite the restricted level, she bypassed it using temporary codes from her internship work last season. At the same time Marcus was stopped, Ryan Keller was logged into the high-security control center. The exact moment he accessed the system matched the camera deletion timestamp. Sarah sat up straight. This was no coincidence. She pulled up a map, found the McRobb Security HQ, a modest building always under guard. Without notifying anyone, she printed fake internship documents, tweaked the referral name, and biked to the office. Under the guise of a law student researching citizen privacy, Sarah entered the lobby, keeping calm as she was led through the outer hallways. While the receptionist turned away, Sarah quietly turned on her phone camera and filmed. At that moment, a tall, lean man with a crew cut and a support staff badge exited the tech room. The name on the badge was faint, but the word Keller stood out beneath the McRobb Security logo. Sarah quickly turned off the camera, hid the phone, and exited through the back to avoid questions. On her way back, a cold shiver ran down her spine. A notification popped up. Your Access account has been locked due to abnormal activity. Further actions will be investigated under university policy. Sarah gasped, rushed to her laptop. The screen showed offline mode. All of her activity from that morning had been disconnected. A red warning flashed, "You have exceeded access permissions. Continued attempts will result in serious consequences." Sarah said nothing. She reached under her pillow, pulled out the palm-sized drive that held all her data, logs, Keller's image, access maps. In the silence, she clenched the device and whispered, her voice calm and resolved, "Keller, if you really are the link, I will bring you out, even if it costs me." The old archive room lay beneath the basement of an abandoned military warehouse on the eastern edge of McRabe. Marcus quietly opened the heavy steel door, his flashlight cutting through the thick layer of dust on the tiled floor. The smell of rusted metal and decaying paper filled the air, as if memories themselves had a scent. In a dark corner, a steel chest remained sealed with a mechanical lock. Marcus ran his fingers over the old code, 91,831, his military ID number. A sharp click echoed. He opened the lid. Inside were a leather-bound journal, several faded maps, and a plastic box containing reel-to-reel tapes. Each item bore the weight of time, yet Marcus treated them with reverence, as though they were bones of fallen comrades. He flipped the journal open. The handwriting read, "Operation Black Desert. Demander ordered no journaling, but I wrote. Third night. Target coordinates don't match civilian maps. Reported up, no response." He paused, his hand trembling slightly, then read on. Day N+5. Attack ordered. Civilians encountered. Not ordered. Civilians encountered. No weapons found. Ordered not to record, not to document. I refused to sign. Tucked behind the cover was a copy of an official report, his name and signature, but forged. A lie legalized with the file of the one who objected. Marcus turned to the tapes. He placed one in the old player and switched it on. A faint hiss, then a voice, breathing hard. "Commander, that wasn't a terrorist base, it was a village. Children! Who gave the order?" Gunfire erupted, followed by a scream, then silence. The tape ended. The memories returned like a flood. Marcus saw the face of a young soldier, Rios, eyes still filled with belief as he died in his arms. Rios had said, "We're here to protect the truth, aren't we, sir?" Marcus looked at an old photo tucked into the journal. Brigade 9 at the base, before the mission. 6 in the photo were now gone, dismissed as PTSD cases and removed from the Army weeks after speaking up. On the back of the photo, Marcus had written, "They called it a tactical mistake. I call it organized crime." In the dark, Marcus stood up. He took the journal, the tapes, and the maps. These were the last fragments of a truth buried for nearly 30 years. But this time, he didn't bring them to bury again. He brought them to restart the war that never ended. In a temporary command post, Coleman read through a file handed to him by an anonymous source. The envelope bore no return address, but was marked with a rare internal military seal. The contents were thin but chilling, a report detailing Operation Black Desert from 1997, nearly identical to Marcus's journal. The cover page was stamped "Top Secret, not to be digitally archived." At the bottom, printed in red, "Authorized for destruction if exposed." The signature beneath was that of Lieutenant General James Garrison, once a close ally of Luke's father. Coleman sat motionless. He had known something was buried, but not that the entire operation had been a ghost mission. No file numbers, no coordinates, no mention on official military records. Everything was executed verbally, erased afterward. It was the perfect strategy for suppressing dissent without tarnishing the system's public image. From the bottom of the folder, he pulled more pages. Death reports of 6 soldiers from Brigade 9. Causes listed: training accident, suicide after psychiatric care, disappearance during special leave, none mentioned combat. Marcus entered. Coleman placed the file on the table. Marcus scanned it, stopping at the red note. "They have reason to be afraid," he said quietly. "I'm the last alive with the originals, and I took no orders." Coleman asked, "What about the press? Why did no one ever uncover this?" Marcus replied calmly, "After I filed the protest, I was transferred to psychiatric evaluation. My records were altered. I was labeled unstable. After I left the military, a fake biography spread. In it, I was aggressive, corrupt, and disobedient. That's why no one believed me." Coleman clenched his jaw. Only one entity could do that. ANCORP. No one else can alter base military data. Marcus looked straight at him. "And now they're back. Not to hide the truth, to erase it." Coleman said nothing. He laid out the old map Marcus once marked with 1997 coordinates. The ink was faded but still visible at the edge of the Dulea Desert, the site of the contested strike. He placed a new map beside it. The same spot now marked the Independent Tactical Systems Complex 14, a privatized base under joint control of ANCOR and several retired generals. Marcus stared at the map, jaw tight. They never stopped, they just changed names and hands. Outside, the wind swept through the camp, tossing papers off the table. Inside, neither man moved, because they both knew what they held was no longer just the truth. It was the kind of truth the powerful would kill to bury. Under the soft yellow light of his second-floor office, Raymond Hale sat silently in front of his computer screen. On one side played the video of Marcus being humiliated, then suddenly addressed as Commander, in the center of McRab. On the other side were a series of emails from Homeland Security and the State Command Center, coldly instructing, stabilize the situation, don't let the media take control, stick to the handling script. Raymond inhaled deeply, his hand tightening slightly on the mouse, then letting go. His name was now attached to a dangerous decision: stay silent to keep his position, or speak the truth he knew and risk losing everything. An urgent internal meeting followed at City Hall. No one mentioned Marcus by name. Everyone spoke in terms of force image, subordinate discipline, and countering media distortion. A member of the council leaned on the table, lowered his voice, and said, "Hale, you didn't get this job because you were good, but because you listened. Don't forget that." Raymond's expression remained neutral, but inside him was a storm. When the others left, he pulled out his phone and replayed an old YouTube clip. Marcus being pinned to the ground, blood dripping from his forehead to the sidewalk, then standing up as if nothing had happened. That image pulled Raymond back to 2002. Kandahar, Afghanistan. He had been a young sergeant, shot in the thigh during a misdirected raid. The unit was ordered to retreat, leaving the wounded behind. But Marcus, then a higher-ranking officer, turned back. Without waiting for orders, he led 4 men through gunfire, lifted Hale onto his back, and ran through smoke and chaos. "I'm responsible for my men," Marcus had said, pressing the wound and glaring at the hesitant squad leader. "No one gets left behind unless I fall first." That night, in his quiet home, Raymond opened the steel cabinet in the corner. Among old uniforms and unit photos sat a yellowed envelope. On it, handwritten words read, "To Hale, never forget who you are." Inside were just a few lines. "I didn't save you because of the rules. I saved you because I knew you still had it in you to live right." His chest tightened. He pulled the silver badge from his pocket, the one engraved with Chief Raymond Hale. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not out of fear, but because he knew that the next morning he would have to choose whether to wear the uniform for honor or for power. And between the two, only one still meant something. Under the pale desk lamp, Raymond read every word of the newly received report from a Department of Defense insider. One red-headed line pierced through the page. "Closely monitor Marcus Walker. Potential leak level, strategic, national." Attached was a supplemental list of associated individuals. At the top was the name Sarah Walker. He frowned, took out a cigarette, but didn't light it. A headache spread across his forehead. Never before had the names in a file made him feel so breathless. These were no longer just entries in a security report. They were people, a savior, a brave niece, and memories buried under duty. The phone rang, a late-night internal call. The caller was Lieutenant Jordan, who had once served with Raymond in Fallujah. "Chief," the voice hesitated, "do you really believe Marcus is a traitor?" Raymond paused, then answered simply, "No." After a moment of silence, he continued, "You're suspended for 3 days for inappropriate remarks." His tone was firm, just loud enough for any potential eavesdropper, but Jordan understood and hung up without a word. An hour later, Hale printed a recorded audio file from the internal system. A senior officer's voice issued a chilling command. "Transfer Sarah to a non-disclosed temporary holding location." Raymond said nothing. He didn't file a report. He saved the file onto a USB, sealed it in an unmarked envelope, and personally dropped it into the mailbox of an independent journalist known for exposing military misconduct. The next morning, at the statewide press conference, Raymond Hale took the podium. In front of him were nearly 10 cameras and rows of microphones from major media outlets. He spoke flawlessly, word for word as drafted by legal counsel. "We are working closely with federal agencies. All field actions are following strict protocol." But when he reached the sentence, "There is no evidence of systemic wrongdoing," his eyes met the center camera. There was a slight pause, his lips pressed tightly together, as though suppressing something unspoken. Those who paid attention could sense it wasn't the gaze of a man loyal to a lie. After the press conference, Raymond didn't attend the usual internal gathering. He returned to his office, took off his coat, removed the police badge from his chest, and placed it carefully on the desk. No one saw. No public statement, no press notification. He simply looked at himself in the mirror and gave a single, No, as if making a vow, not a hero, not a traitor. Just a man repaying the debt of a life saved, in silence where it matters, and with action where it counts. Beneath the gray-painted concrete ceiling of an unnamed military facility, Luke Garrison sat silently in the cold isolation room. The soundproofed steel walls, dim lighting, and the low hum of the air conditioning made time feel frozen. No one told him the reason for his detention, and no one came to interrogate him. The door finally opened after nearly 10 hours of silence. A man entered, tall, with short silver hair and eyes as cold as blades. His uniform bore the insignia of a 3-star general, the name embroidered on the chest, Garrison. "You've ruined everything," he said the moment the door shut, his voice not loud but heavy enough to crush the air. "Our network has begun to crack, and you're the weakest link." Luke didn't look up. "Why did you come in person?" Garrison stepped closer to the table, placed a leather-bound file on it, and tapped the cover with his finger. "Good morning, Luke." Luke waited for another minute or so, then tapped the cover with his finger. "I didn't come for you. I came for Marcus Walker." Luke didn't need to open the file to know what was inside. The 1997 incident, the operation that the Garrison family had always seen as the beginning of their downfall. Marcus was the one who exposed his father, the reason he was demoted, removed from the High Military Council, and forced into an academic position at the academy. "He should have been eliminated back then," Garrison said, his voice deepening. "Now he's back, not just to stir up the past, but to destroy everything we built." Luke looked up. His gaze was complicated, not entirely angry, but not obedient either. "So you want to kill him and make it look like an accident? A terrorist attack by some outsider? Or a tactical mishap?" General Garrison leaned back, arms crossed. "You need to restore this family's honor. This is your last chance to do what's right for me." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. He leaned in, whispering like a hiss in Luke's ear. "Assassinate him. Make it look like internal conflict or a military clash. No traces, no survivors." Luke's heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but because an old memory suddenly resurfaced. A red dust battlefield, bullets flying, and a silhouette dragging a blood-soaked body to safety. It was Garrison, his father, lying in the crossfire, and it was Marcus Walker, no one else, who pulled him from the brink of death. That truth had never been spoken aloud, never acknowledged. Garrison survived, but never publicly admitted his debt. "I owed him my father's life," Luke said slowly, his eyes still locked with his father's. Garrison clenched his jaw. "That's exactly why he has to die. Anyone who ever made me bow doesn't deserve to exist." The room fell silent again. Garrison turned away, hand resting on the door handle. Before leaving, he glanced back, his eyes sharp as a blade. "Kill him, or lose the right to call yourself my son." The door slammed shut, leaving Luke alone in the soundless room, hands resting on his knees, his gaze blurred by a fracture no one but his family had carved. McRae welcomed Luke back with a quiet, overcast afternoon. No one greeted him, no headlines announced his release, and no one dared approach him since his suspension had been issued. But Luke didn't care about the wary glances or the whispers behind his back. He walked past familiar streets, shoes brushing against the asphalt, eyes fixed on the distance where Marcus's temporary base was being discreetly guarded. Coleman didn't know Luke had been released. Marcus didn't either, and Luke kept it that way, treating it as an advantage. He said nothing, contacted no one, simply reinserted himself into the town's old loop. He showed up at the train station, coffee shop, marketplace, never staying more than 5 minutes, but always asking the same type of question. "Has Marcus been by recently?" Or, "Do you remember the route the Special Forces team took the last few days?" Earl began to notice. He watched Luke with suspicion, said nothing directly, but reported to Coleman that Luke was showing too much unnecessary interest. Coleman frowned, but told Darrell to keep watching. There wasn't enough reason to act yet. Luke remained unbothered. He observed from a distance, stood at alley corners overlooking the military zone, passed by the repair shop where soldiers frequently stopped, always moving like someone forgotten, but his eyes betrayed the turmoil eating away inside him. He entered an old bar, the same place where his father once held victory parties years ago. The room still had the old dusty mirror. Luke looked into his own reflection, his face changed by time and the Force, shaped by commands that left no room for refusal. He placed a hand over his chest where his father's insignia was still pinned, then suddenly slammed his fist into the mirror. The glass shattered, fell into fragments, slicing apart the image he once believed to be a man of justice. Hours later, Luke appeared outside Coleman's compound. Under dim light, he crouched beneath a vehicle, gently attaching a coin-sized device that blinked once before turning off. The tracker was in place. He stood, dusted off his hands as if completing a duty. But instead of walking away, Luke turned back to look at the base, where Marcus remained, unaware. Night fell. A breeze stirred. Luke stood still for a few seconds, neither approaching nor retreating. His hand rested over his left chest pocket, eyes fixed on the distant lights. He whispered, so softly only the wind could hear, "I'm not sure I can do it." Then he turned and walked away, his silhouette fading into the night. No one knew for sure whether he was preparing to strike or seeking one last escape from betraying the man who had saved his father. All signs pointed to danger, but beneath his silent actions there lay a ticking bomb, and even Luke wasn't sure who it would explode on. The phone rang in the heavy silence that blanketed the old wooden house where Marcus lived, a silence thick as nightfall. He had never feared the sound of a ringing phone, having once faced war and sirens in the space between life and death. But this time, the sound cut like a blade through something he was trying to keep whole. A young woman's voice came through, choked, broken, as if she had just run from hell. "Uncle Marcus? I'm Sarah's roommate. The military police, they took her right in the library courtyard." The sentence broke apart in panic and resistance, then went dead. Marcus stood still, holding the phone, his eyes fixed on the dark outside the window. A gust of night wind passed through the faded curtain, casting shadows on the wall where medals once hung, long since taken down. An arrest warrant? For a student? What justice remained? Unauthorized access to defense data, so the system was no longer hiding behind the law. It had shown its face. He got up, walked straight to the wooden cabinet, and took out a sealed envelope marked, in handwritten words, "Final Contingency." Next to it, he retrieved a heavy military flashlight, the same one that had lit bloodied and secret-filled tunnels. At the university, Sarah had been detained for less than 2 minutes after leaving the library. 4 people in gray uniforms, without name tags, appeared as if they had tracked her every move. They recited a robotic line, requested to cooperate in an investigation involving access, storage, and distribution of sensitive military data. No warrant, no written order, no lawyer. All of Sarah's personal devices were confiscated, her school account suspended, and her scholarship revoked. The university's website posted an immediate statement. "We are fully cooperating with relevant authorities." Several students were summoned to the security office to answer questions about Sarah's political intent. She was a final-year law student, never once violating campus rules. Back in McRae, Marcus sat by the wooden desk near the window. The street lamp outside cast a pale yellow light onto an unopened bottle of old liquor. His hand trembled slightly, but his eyes no longer looked weary. The town lay still, as if everyone had washed their hands in compromise, in comfort, in fear. Sarah, his own blood, had become the first warning shot, and he understood the language of the system all too well. Stay silent or pay the price. Marcus took a slip of paper and wrote a short line, "Don't let my niece bear the cost of her elders." He folded the note, left it on the desk, and stepped out of the house without locking the door. Behind him was a cramped room with faded photographs, a torn world map missing the Middle East, and the last of his peace, now stolen. In his hands were the envelope, the flashlight, and footsteps leading into the darkness, a place he once believed he had left for good. The military base gate stood tall in the night like a silent fortress. The yellow lights from the guard post cast sharp shadows on Marcus's face, revealing every crease like battle lines. He walked up slowly and handed the young soldier a small object that fit neatly in his palm, an old silver badge, its letters faded, but the insignia of the 9th Brigade still clear. The soldier looked at the badge, then up at Marcus again, this time differently, as if no longer seeing an old man in a dark shirt, but a living chapter of classified history. Within minutes, an officer arrived and led him down a quiet corridor. The scent of gun oil, wall paint, and rusted metal filled the air, pulling Marcus back to sleepless nights and strategies past. The small meeting room at the corridor's end had once witnessed countless tactical debates. Now, it welcomed him with the towering figure of David Coleman standing at the window, back turned. Coleman didn't immediately face Marcus. The weight in the room was thick. With respect, with debt. They stood that way in silence until Marcus spoke, direct and without hesitation. "They took my niece, David. You know what that means." Coleman turned around. His military stiffness vanished for a moment. A fist slammed onto the desk, knocking a folder askew. "They went after a student? Your niece?" His voice roared. "This has gone too far." Marcus nodded slightly and sat down, his eyes now steady. "They want my silence. This was a warning, but I doubt they'll stop there." Coleman pulled a thin file from a drawer and tossed it onto the table. "I've been summoned to the Security Council tomorrow morning. This may be the last time I see you as a friend. Then, I'll ask you straight," Marcus said. "Do you still mean what you once told me? That if I ever needed you, you'd stand beside me no matter the cost?" Coleman looked at him for a long time. "I still mean it, but to bring this system down, I need something they can't deny." Marcus paused. "I used to think conscience was enough, that it could stand alone." "Conscience can't be presented to Congress," Coleman replied, then lowered his voice. "There's a place, the Northern Archive, at Black Ridge Base. It used to belong to the military, now it's run by Ancor, the private security firm that had contracts with Luke's father." Marcus looked up. "I thought it was destroyed." Coleman shook his head. "They cleared it, but not completely. I've heard footage of that operation still exists. If you get it, you don't just save Sarah, you bring down the pillar they hide behind." No more words were exchanged. Marcus stood and tucked the envelope into his jacket. Coleman seemed about to speak, then stayed silent. The door opened, and rain gusted into the hallway. Marcus stepped out, his shoulders soaked quickly, but his back stood straighter than when he arrived. The rain fell steadily, like footsteps echoing from a battlefield long past. He didn't look back, only whispered under his breath, unsure if it was meant for himself or the night sky. "They struck first. Now it's our turn." A special training session was held in the secondary drill yard, previously used for close-range reflex combat. Coleman wanted to keep the 50-man unit sharp after recent disruptions. Each soldier was assigned a position, simulating an emergency scenario in a civilian zone. Boots hit the ground in unison, and commands rang out in rhythm through the humid, dust-filled air. But in Coleman's eyes, one man was off. Daryl, the communications and data analyst known for being quiet, appeared out of sync with the team. He kept glancing around, avoided eye contact, and at one moment, when Coleman turned away, Daryl slipped a hand into his chest pocket and discreetly pressed something. The internal camera didn't miss it. After the drill, Coleman received an urgent technical report. A strange, unidentified signal had been transmitted from the training yard, encrypted in compressed audio format, a method once used by counterintelligence units. The transmission matched the exact moment Daryl touched his chest. Coleman summoned Daryl to a small command room. Daryl arrived on time, saluted by the book, but his gaze shifted slightly. When Coleman questioned him about using a personal device in the restricted zone, Daryl replied calmly, "Just a voicemail to my mother. It's her birthday." Asked to retrieve the file, Daryl claimed it had been auto-deleted due to a network error. The answer was short and clean, too clean to be overlooked. Coleman didn't argue. He dismissed Daryl and immediately ordered a full data trace of outgoing signals in the past 24 hours, filtering those from Daryl's registered devices. He also reopened Daryl's personnel file, which he had previously trusted without question. That evening, during a confidential meeting, a soldier recalled, "Daryl used to work at Ancor before joining us. His file had a red stamp marked Priority Exemption from Command." Silence fell. The thought settled in Coleman's mind like sand in a weapons chamber. Unseen, yet corrosive. Daryl's unusually fast recruitment, bypassing multiple interview rounds, now appeared to be part of a larger arrangement. Later that day, Coleman met Marcus at the old logistics zone and explained everything. Marcus listened silently, eyes fixed on the concrete wall, like reading invisible lines. Then, in a cold, steady tone, he said, "If there's a traitor in your team, he's either a fool or he's got a more complicated plan than we think. The remark made Coleman's spine tighten. A fool was easier to handle than someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Back at the command post, Coleman sat with arms folded, eyes cold as the concrete beneath him. The door opened. Darrell entered, tall and expressionless. He stood at attention. Coleman didn't yell or accuse. He simply studied him and asked, "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" Darrell didn't flinch. "Some things make me uneasy," he replied, "but I'm not sure if they're strange or just things I haven't understood yet." His tone wasn't defensive, but neither was it clarifying. His gaze remained still. That night, Marcus visited a gas station on the town's edge where an aging veteran who once served with Darrell worked. When Marcus mentioned the name, the old man lowered his voice. "He got kicked from OnCorp for refusing to alter data. They called him the one who wouldn't obey. Thought that'd be it. But months later, he was back as an analyst. That kind, if he's not selling himself, he's digging for something." Back at base, Marcus returned to Coleman, who handed him an internal report. A surveillance mission had been compromised. The leak occurred precisely when the unit pulled out, on a night coordinated by Darrell. Without saying more, Coleman restricted all of Darrell's system access. Darrell didn't protest. He signed the notice, surrendered his device, and left the room in silence. Since then, he rarely joined group activities, avoided public hours, and slipped away during roll calls. Some whispered, others stayed quiet. Suspicion began to creep into discipline like rust-down steel. Late at night, Marcus was patrolling the northern corridor when he saw Darrell by the vending machine. The air between them was thick. Marcus approached, his posture unbending with age. No long speech, just a direct gaze into the young man's dark eyes. "Whose life are you gambling with, Darrell?" Darrell didn't blink. After a long silence, he turned slightly and said, a voice flat as wind against tin, "One day you'll know. I didn't choose the wrong side." The words hit the floor like lead, heavy, still, undefined. He walked off, fading into the unlit hall. Marcus didn't call him back. He just stood there, as if he'd seen something familiar in someone he never fully understood. That morning began like any other day at the base. The sky was overcast and a light breeze drifted through the corridors, carrying the scent of steel and sweat from the training yard. Marcus returned to his room after a routine data inspection at the technical center. He opened the door and stepped inside, about to remove his jacket, then paused. On the simple wooden desk against the wall lay a white envelope, unsealed, with no sender indicated. Its surface was flat, its edges sharp, as if it had just been placed there moments earlier. Marcus stood still for a beat, staring at the envelope, then approached. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he retrieved gloves from the drawer, slipped them on, untied the small cord sealing the letter, and pulled out a neatly folded sheet. The typewritten message was cold and concise, stripped of flair or excess. "If you want to live, stay silent. This is the first and last warning." Marcus read it once, his expression unchanged. He read it again, his lips tightening. Then he folded the page, lit a steel lighter from the drawer, and burned it to ash, letting the flakes fall into a metal tray on the desk. He pressed the remaining embers with the back of his hand, crushing them with a practiced motion, as if used to threats but never allowing them to exist beyond paper. When the silence passed, he began scanning the room. A misaligned water bottle, an open pen case, and a notebook shifted by a few centimeters. It wasn't theft, nor a rushed search. It was someone who knew the occupant's habits and tried not to leave a trace. But there was one mistake. A faint fingerprint arced across the window glass, left by a bare finger, something a gloved hand wouldn't leave behind. Marcus sat down and powered on an offline device, a mechanical hard drive encrypted with an old wartime cipher used only by a select few. The screen lit up and the directory appeared, but key entries in the folder labeled Operation Ash Lane were missing. He checked the access log. The screen displayed accessed 317. At that exact time, Marcus had been at the technical center. There was no reason for the drive in his room to be accessed unless someone else had done it. He immediately called Coleman. The call was double encrypted, yet Coleman's voice was visibly tense when he answered. "I know," he said. "My end just lost the entire primary backup on the main server. The access time matches yours." Then he added, "All admin-level permissions in the tech system have been reset. The head of technical ops can't even log into the core network." Marcus sat in silence. His fingertips tapped lightly on the table. He stared at the screen, where the blinking cursor pulsed like a synthetic heartbeat. There would be no more subtle warnings. They had entered his quarters, tampered with his past, indeed reached into a vault he'd sealed for years. This was no longer a test, it was a declaration of war. Coleman called back almost immediately after the first exchange, his voice sharp with rage. "They got into the core of the system, Marcus. 3 minutes. The surveillance feed for your private wing went dark for exactly 3 minutes. No system errors. That means someone rewired it from the inside." Marcus didn't answer right away. 3 minutes wasn't long, but it was enough to erase a man's entire history if the person knew what they were doing. Coleman added in a lower, harsher voice, "The night shift technician disappeared this morning. Handwritten resignation, no contact details. His login data was wiped clean from the logs." Marcus set the phone down and sat upright in the fading light of late afternoon. He opened the secondary archive, searching for any backups tied to Sarah and Coleman. The drive, once passed to Sarah, was now in military police custody, classified as evidence in the ongoing investigation. Coleman, following a recent internal audit, had been stripped of high-level access. All that remained was a printed campaign map, the 1997 operational zone, marked with red slashes and stamped legally nullified. At the bottom corner, Marcus's signature had been partially erased. Within the barracks, the atmosphere had changed. Soldiers who used to greet him each morning now quietly turned away. Some stopped mid-conversation when he entered communal spaces. A piece of paper was slipped under his door at midnight, bearing a simple, anonymous line, "They won't stop. Everyone has limits, so do you." Marcus read it, folded it, and didn't throw it away. For the first time in years, he felt isolation not from the enemy, but from behind his own lines. Avoidant glances, vanished greetings, unnaturally quiet footsteps at night. He understood so long as he remained on base, he was the fish laid bare on the cutting board. That night, Marcus gathered essential items into an old military duffel. He passed the data room one last time, then exited the compound through a side gate, without permission, without farewell. His destination, the old house on the outskirts of McRobb, the place he lived after retiring from the force, where the electrical system had never been digitized, where he had hidden a vintage mechanical encryption device, the only one still untouched by remote intrusion. By the time Marcus reached the gate, night had fully fallen. Yellow streetlights flickered along the empty road. He paused, glanced back one final time. From the shadows near the guard post, Coleman emerged, not in uniform. They didn't shake hands, no nods exchanged, only a shared glance, lasting seconds. Marcus spoke quietly, his tone as steady as a dagger plunged into a wooden table. If they want silence, then they picked the wrong man. The words fell into the weighty darkness, without a gunshot yet sharp enough to draw a line of battle. Behind him was a fractured system, ahead a past he had never dared to fully unearth, and this time he would not miss the final chance. At the break of dawn, Marcus received word from a night shift guard. Darrell had exited the compound through the rear maintenance gate, no registration, no report. Such behavior couldn't be ignored. Coleman immediately brought Marcus to the surveillance control room. On the monitor, the footage showed Darrell entering the edge of the woods, where the camera barely caught the faint shadow of a figure moving. More than 10 minutes later, Darrell returned, walking quickly but not in panic. Before leaving, he was approached by an unfamiliar man in plain clothes, who slipped something small and round, wrapped in black paper, into his hand. Coleman slammed the console table, jaw tight. That's it, he's not even trying to hide anymore. He reached for the communicator, but Marcus raised a hand, eyes fixed on the screen. "I want to speak with him one last time," he said calmly, every word weighed. "If he really turned, I want to know for myself." The morning light had spread across the training yard by the time Marcus stepped out. It was quiet, save for the distant thump of boots on concrete as small groups of soldiers jogged in formation. Darrell stood alone in a corner, hands in his pockets, eyes on the barbed wire fence. He didn't look surprised, as if he had anticipated this meeting. Marcus stopped a few paces away. No greetings, no introductions. Darrell spoke first, his tone even, as if prepared. "I know what you think, and you have every right to think it. But if there's still space left for trust, use it this time. I've never betrayed anyone." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He stepped closer, eyes sharp. "Who did you meet out there? What was that device? And why did all the sensitive data disappear after your shift?" Darrell stayed silent, then slowly pulled a small hard drive from his inner pocket and held it up like a token. "I used this to back up what was left before they wiped it all. I had to disconnect from the internal network to avoid being tracked." Marcus didn't take it, only looked on, waiting. "Encore once fired me for refusing to alter their data. I came back through another door as a contractor. Only from the inside did I realize how rotten this system is." Darrell lowered his voice, eyes darkening. "We can't beat them with laws on paper. I had to step into the filth to drag them into the light." Marcus said nothing. Something in him shifted. Not trust, not exactly suspicion either. Part of him found truth in those words. Another part, shaped by past betrayals, demanded proof. The silence between them grew dense. Darrell said nothing more, didn't defend himself. He placed the device on the concrete step and turned away, walking slowly toward the barracks. Quiet, but not evasive. Marcus watched him leave. The wind pushed his coat flat against his lean frame. His face revealed no emotion, but something in his eyes faltered. The line between betrayal and sacrifice, between lies and necessary choices, was beginning to blur, and he knew, more frightening than the enemy, was the moment you no longer knew who to trust. Marcus sat beneath a dim yellow lamp in the logistics room, surrounded by documents spread across the table. He was reviewing all internal team communications from the past 3 weeks. Streams of encrypted code, IP addresses, and timestamps flashed by like the rapid breathing of a soldier tracking a target. A strange line of messages appeared, encoded in a style last used by intelligence units before 2005. This wasn't a random artifact, nor something a common soldier could execute. Marcus flagged the message, closed his notebook, and stood. Outside, Coleman waited, face worn by sleeplessness and stress. Without a word, he handed Marcus a newly printed report from Military Legal, a document sent to High Command, accusing both men of conspiracy in a military data manipulation ring. The source, an encrypted transmission tied to Darrell's account. Coleman spoke through clenched teeth. "He's hiding too much. If we delay, we'll lose the entire unit." Marcus looked down at the paper, then straight at Coleman. "I'm not covering for him, but sometimes in the mud, someone might be digging a well." The line didn't soften Coleman's gaze. It remained sharp, battle-ready, but he stepped back, letting Marcus decide the next move. Darrell's questioning followed immediately. No transcript, no witnesses. When asked, he didn't deny, didn't flinch, didn't even look surprised. He pulled out another printed document and laid it on the table. "This is the original report," he said. "I wrote it last year and submitted it through a secure internal channel. Someone stole the format and rewrote it. That same person is now operating the system from the shell I once used to mask my deeper access." Marcus reviewed it, line by line. The structure matched, but key words were altered, just enough to paint him and Coleman as the culprits. This wasn't amateur work. Only someone deeply embedded in the system could pull it off. When Darrell was dismissed, Marcus stood by the window, looking out. The training yard lay empty, streaks of sunlight slanting across cracked concrete. He felt caught between logic and instinct. Coleman wanted to end it quickly, to protect the unit by cutting off the source of suspicion. But Darrell, in his own reckless way, had left behind threads that suggested he was risking everything to do what was right. That evening, Marcus met Darrell again, under the old water tower where signals were weak and few came around. He didn't waste words. "You know if you're lying to me, no one can save you." His voice was low, restrained, like a trigger yet to be pulled. Darrell didn't blink. "I don't need saving. I just need you to see it through." The silence that followed was heavy. Two men balanced on the thin line between life, death, and truth. And in that moment, Marcus knew that trust was no longer optional. It was now part of the game he was already playing. until the very end. The basement briefing room at Fort Ridley, typically quiet, echoed with hurried footsteps. A senior officer entered without looking at anyone and placed a sealed file on the table. David Coleman recognized trouble just from his colleague's expression. The file contained a summons, no explanation, demanding his immediate return to Eastern Command for verification of unauthorized personnel use in a civilian context. Coleman glanced at the screen showing Marcus still investigating Main Street, then closed the laptop and walked out. A soldier asked quietly if he should inform Mr. Walker, but Coleman shook his head. The order was clear: no contact with anyone beyond the authorized chain. Marcus heard about the summons through a hushed voice in the hallway. A brown-skinned soldier, probably a sergeant, briefly tapped his shoulder and said, "The captain's been called in. Rumors say it's about overstepping command. I think someone's starting to suspect something." He didn't wait for a response. Marcus stood still, his gaze fixed at the end of the hall as if trying to recall a half-finished melody. He recognized the system's tactics: begin with severing your closest allies, then isolate you from data, equipment, and communication, bit by bit. Back in his temporary office, Marcus tried logging into the data system. A red error message blinked across the screen. On the second attempt, he checked the shared folders from Sarah. The entire evidence archive, labeled CAM 47 Identity Dump, had been reclassified as classified internal use only. A chill rose in his chest. Not fear, but cold, like standing inside a steam-filled room while others silently waited for him to freeze solid. He called Coleman. The line rang, but after 3 beeps, an automated voice answered coldly. "Officer David Coleman is under internal review. No outside communication is permitted." Marcus slowly closed the phone. He had seen the system kill truth in many ways. It didn't need lies. It only needed people to feel cut off, useless, disconnected from their only source of clarity. At his desk, he opened a drawer and pulled out a note, handwritten by Coleman. "Prepare for the worst, but don't abandon the goal." Marcus gripped it tightly, like holding on to a promise. He understood. If power couldn't control him, isolation would, and the first move was to take away the one person who still believed in him, so that he would begin to doubt everything. Darrell appeared in the east hallway, seemingly by chance, but his scrutinizing look and polite smile made Marcus wary. The young soldier approached with an eager friendliness that felt too rehearsed. He offered help in regaining access to the locked files, claiming experience with internal censorship cases. His words were smooth, but something in his tone felt more like a test than sincere support. The way you look at things, sometimes the ones you trust most are the reason everything falls apart, Darrell said, eyes following a military truck in the distance. To Marcus, the line scraped across the fragile trust he still held. He gave no answer, only watched. That night, Marcus returned to the operations room and found something odd in the access logs. Someone had tried accessing the locked database 3 times in one day using a privileged internal account. The terminal used was Station 4 in the West Wing. On duty that day, Darrell. The next morning, Marcus confronted him directly. "Have you spoken to anyone outside the team?" Darrell responded quickly. "Just my girlfriend, and even then, I'm not sure they're not tapping her phone." It sounded believable. Too believable. Marcus offered a polite smile, but the trust in his eyes had faded. Later, Marcus asked Darrell to accompany him to meet a witness, a technician formerly assigned to the Regional Archive Center. Darrell declined, citing a last-minute logistics meeting. Marcus went alone. The meeting was uneventful, but the following day, the witness sent a message saying a strange car had been parked outside his house for hours, and someone had been watching. The man walked. The feeling of being followed seeped into Marcus's thoughts like a colorless toxin. Back in his office, with limited system access and his phone offering no signal, the room felt colder with every breath. Coleman was under investigation. Sarah was cut off. And the one person who approached him most was casting the darkest shadow. Marcus opened his notebook and sat at the cold wooden desk. He slowly wrote, "When trust breaks, the front line blurs. Friend and enemy are divided by just one look." The words were dry, but they were his only compass inside the growing maze. The lights went out. His computer displayed a power failure. His phone vibrated. One message: No sender, no signature. He's about to show his face. Don't trust anyone, not even the one who called you Commander. Marcus stared at the screen, his breath slowing. It wasn't fear the message brought. It was a truth he already knew too well. Marcus's encrypted inbox lit up just as he finished pouring a glass of cold water. The subject line read, "Urgent Advisory." He opened the message, his eyes pausing at a quoted law. Any dissemination of classified data related to the 1997 campaign would be punished under the National Security Act, including revocation of citizenship and imprisonment without parole. No signature followed, just a final cold line. This is the last warning. He stepped away from the table and stood before the window. Outside, dusk fell, with light rain tapping steadily, each drop a reminder of the silence being stitched across the country. 2 days earlier, 3 major publications abruptly declined to pursue the case, citing lack of independently verifiable sources. One editor, who once backed him, sent a final message. "I'm sorry. Someone from Washington called." That afternoon, in a small cafe near the outskirts, Marcus met a man in an expensive shirt and gold-plated watch. Calm in demeanor but cold-eyed, the man introduced himself as a representative of a private defense organization seeking experienced field commanders. He spoke while pouring tea. "You don't need to fight anymore. You could retire, write memoirs, receive lifetime benefits, and live wherever you want, as long as no one learns more about the X-Zone campaign." Marcus said nothing. The man continued, voice lower. "The world runs on silence. Those who talk too much don't live long." Marcus left without looking back. That night, an audio file arrived on his secure device. Sarah's voice came phiscent, interrupted by footsteps, then a man's. "Does he still have the backups? Are you sure?" A metal object hit a table. Silence. The recording ended there. In his old study, Marcus sat frozen. One side of his desk held the names of soldiers lost in a battle long buried, names misspelled, omitted from reports. On the other side was his niece, the last person still linked to a hope he hadn't yet abandoned. The choice before him was raw and brutal. He opened his notebook to the final page. As rain tapped the roof, he drew 2 columns: silence, live, and speak, lose. Under each, he listed what might follow. The more he wrote, the heavier his hand felt, as if weighed down by memory itself. The past came flooding in. That summer, he'd faced a lethal crossroads. A young platoon was pinned under fire while a supply convoy was under siege. The official order: protect the convoy, leave the team. He disobeyed. 3 soldiers survived. He was pulled from the field, demoted, and never given an explanation. He lost his title and place, but kept his conscience. Now, the stakes were higher. Not a few lives, but a distorted truth buried for decades. If I stay silent this time, who am I? The question cut across his chest like a blade. He closed the notebook and stood. The decision hadn't been spoken yet, but it pressed against the walls like storm air about to break. The military cemetery in the foggy outskirts was cold as an unfinished memory. Marcus walked past rows of headstones like unfulfilled vows. He stopped at a plain grave. Flowers wilted, soil fresh. The name carved into stone gripped his heart. Thomas J. Whitman, a soldier whose death had been buried along with the mission. It never appeared in reports, only in memories of survivors like Marcus. A female voice behind him made him flinch. A frail woman, wrapped in a wool coat, held white chrysanthemums. "Did you know my son?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the grave. Marcus nodded. She added, voice rough with wind and time, "I don't want revenge. I just want someone brave enough to say my son was a good man." Her words sliced through the doubt clinging to Marcus's chest. He answered softly, "You will have that," then turned away, fist tightening in his pocket. Returning to the base, Marcus received a package. The guard handed it over wordlessly and walked off. Inside was a handwritten letter, sharp and concise. It was from Coleman. No emotion, no backstory, just fragments packed like a soldier rationing dry food. Near the end, Marcus paused. "If you stay, silent they win, but if you speak, even if I'm erased from record, I'll know I once served under a man worth trusting." His phone rang. A low, flat voice, void of emotion. If you publish the data, you'll never see your niece again." The call ended. No further threat was needed. The terror came from the emptiness that followed. Marcus sat in silence, desk lamp casting light across a face carved by time. Before him lay documents, images, recordings, truth buried under layers of national security. They were his final battlefield. He opened the laptop, entered the code, and uploaded everything to his private server. He typed one line: "I served this country with honor. This is the last time I will do so." He scheduled the upload for 3:00 a.m., then stuck a note to the screen in clean, bold letters. "I've been silent long enough. It's time the system speaks." The moment he hit confirm, the hallway lights turned red. The internal alarm blared. A warning appeared. "Unauthorized data transfer detected." Footsteps thundered down the hall. Someone was coming. Marcus stood, turned toward the steel door, now shaking. He breathed steadily, like a soldier facing the final threshold. The door hadn't opened, but the choice was already made, and this time he wouldn't retreat. Before dawn, Marcus jolted awake to the blaring of an internal alert. A system message flashed in red. Peripheral device disconnected unexpectedly. He rushed to his desk, only to find the laptop gone. Strangely, the lock remained intact. The surveillance camera had returned to its default position, and no motion was recorded. When he checked the security system, Marcus discovered the neighborhood's camera feed had been cut for exactly 3 minutes. Just enough time for someone with higher clearance than the system itself to come and go without leaving a trace. He accessed the backup server, searching for the scheduled data release logs. The screen was empty. The buffer had been wiped clean, and the access history revealed that an internal IP chain had interfered earlier that morning. The method was cold, calculated, professional, not the work of a lone soldier, but a programmed strike embedded within the system. Outside, the loudspeaker echoed from command. "By decision of the Coordination Council, Captain David Coleman is suspended pending internal investigation." The next line was drowned out by whispers in the base. Marcus checked his phone and saw leaked footage circulating internally. Coleman, surrounded by 3 senior officers during a closed-door meeting, his face livid, finger pointing at a superior. A soldier tried to stop him, then the clip cut to Coleman being pulled out of the room. Marcus felt his temples throb with every pulse. No further explanation was needed. The target was clear. Silence all remaining voices. The laptop gone, the data erased. Coleman removed. A triple strike on evidence, alliance, and time. A few hours later, Marcus's access credentials were revoked. The message was short and cold. "You no longer have system access." When he scanned his old military ID at the command center door, the screen read, "Access denied." A young officer beside him quietly removed the card from his hand, gave him a brief look, then walked away without a word. A small gesture, but unmistakable. Marcus had been pushed off the front line. That afternoon, an internal bulletin listed Marcus under potential high-level security leak. He would be placed under indefinite surveillance. The entry was brief. Formerly served in Zone X, had access to sensitive data, now displaying signs of protocol breach. He returned to his old coordination room, now cold and barren like an abandoned storeroom. The desk had been shifted, the monitor blank, and the chair still faced the wall as if someone had just stood up in a rush. Every trace of connection to his mission was gone, leaving only silence. Marcus sat down, his hand resting on the table's edge, eyes tracing the shallow scratches he had never noticed before. Each one marked a moment, a decision made, a command sent, a comrade who once believed in the system he upheld. Now there was nothing. No data, no allies, no rank. This battlefield had no smoke or bullets, yet it killed with silence. And Marcus, a man who had crossed the line of life and death many times, now found himself trapped in a hollow box labeled security. The real question wasn't what he would do next, but who was already watching, and how many steps ahead they were. A message arrived as Marcus sat blankly. Just one line, no sender, no encryption, but sent through an internal channel he knew had been blocked since the previous day. Sarah has been transferred from Quarantine Zone 3. New location unknown. The message landed like the final cut, severing the last bond he had to the cause. Sarah had been the only link that made him feel he wasn't alone, and now she too was gone. He immediately called the lawyer who once defended Sarah, a young woman brave enough to speak publicly despite threats. The response was administrative and cold. By federal security directive, all information related to defendant Sarah Walker has been temporarily classified. I am not authorized to disclose any details. The call ended abruptly. A faint beep came from an old device in the corner. Marcus opened it, his private encrypted channel. A scheduled message had been sent. The sender, Sarah. The message was blurry, short, but heavy. Don't stop because of me. If you fall back, they'll erase everything. Marcus stood, gripping the chair. His eyes, which had once seen blood mixed with desert sand, now burned with something nameless. The pain wasn't in the loss, it was in how it happened. Calculated, merciless, cold. The system didn't have to kill him, it only needed to destroy everything he loved, leaving him to rot from within. He walked to the metal cabinet, retrieving a disconnected external drive buried beneath years of dust and chipped paint. The lock was still intact. His hands moved from memory as he entered the code. A soft click, and it opened. Inside was a military-grade hard drive, the kind used for black operations, capable of self-destruction upon unauthorized access. Marcus placed it on the desk, sitting in front of it like facing one final resurrection. Among the ruins, this was the only lead that remained, and he understood, to turn the tide, he could not afford to lose another minute. Marcus sat motionless on the wooden chair by the window, hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the dim sky outside. Faint sunlight streamed diagonally through the glass, casting pale streaks across his shoulders. On the table lay a summons stamped with the cold seal of the Department of Defense. It contained no explanation, only a single command. No delay. Beneath it was the signature of someone he once knew well, once called a comrade, once hoped was an ally. Coleman had brought the order earlier that morning, his eyes betraying fatigue and unease. He stood silently at the door, offering the paper with nothing more than a short sentence. "They won't let me come with you." In that moment, Marcus knew this wasn't an invitation, it was a warning. In the suffocating stillness of the room, he opened his old bag and placed inside a few yellowed photocopies, a notebook marked with a faded military insignia, and a letter from Sarah, written during her first arrest, the handwriting shaky. Each item was a fragment of his life, packed not out of sentiment, but as tools of survival, should every door slam shut. The escort vehicle arrived in the afternoon, parking before the administrative complex on the outskirts of town, once a military base, now converted into a national security tribunal. Reflected in the car's window was Marcus's lined face, shadowed by the still, steel-eyed guards. The main gate was sealed, wrapped in 2 layers of electrified fencing. With patrol dogs pacing in ceaseless motion, the air felt as if something inside was ready to erupt. When the car stopped, the door clicked open. Marcus stepped out with his back straight, gripping the strap of his bag tightly. Before him stretched an empty courtyard. Groups of townspeople stood outside the perimeter fence, watching with mixed fear and curiosity. A journalist raised a camera before being blocked by security. No words were exchanged, but the silent consensus was clear. This man carried answers bigger than any ordinary hearing. The main hall was housed in the central building, a block of steel and concrete lit by harsh white bulbs hanging from high ceilings. Inside, a long table draped in black velvet divided the room, one side for defense officials, the other for the Department of Justice, and at the center, 3 seats reserved for the Special Reconciliation Board. Everyone was already in place, their faces cold and still. Marcus was led to a single chair under a blinding overhead light. No lawyer was mentioned, no defense dossier presented. A man in a gray suit, bearing the insignia of the National Security Oversight Office, approached the microphone. His tone was calm, yet sharp. "You once held lethal authority over a covert unit in a combat zone. Classified mission, no official record. We are here to hear your account, from beginning to end." This wasn't a trial, nor was it a defense hearing. It was framed as a retelling, yet the silence around Marcus felt heavier than any indictment. He lifted his gaze, studying each face, searching for conscience, who came to listen, who came to erase. The question hung unspoken. Was this a hearing or a burial of truth? A silver-haired general at the top of the table leaned forward. In the 1997 operation, did you authorize live fire? The room contracted. All eyes turned to Marcus, whose chin rose slightly. Yes, he said firmly. I gave the order when our unit was ambushed. No reinforcements, no retreat route. I chose to protect the survivors. The general pressed again. Then, do you accept responsibility for the 7 civilian deaths in the adjacent area? Marcus tilted his head. Those civilians were killed by fire from international support forces. Wrong intel, wrong coordinates. That report was buried, and you know it. The air thickened. Some scribbled notes, others whispered. A massive screen flickered on, showing blurred footage, running figures, a burning outpost, overlapping screams. At the end, an image of Marcus standing amid rubble appeared, face close-cropped, unreadable. A man in plain clothes rose and addressed the microphone. If you're innocent, why stay silent for 20 years? Marcus didn't flinch. Because no one wanted to listen, he said. For 2 decades you've erased evidence, rewarded silence, and condemned truth-tellers to inescapable nightmares. The room fell still. A senior senator shifted, tapping his pen softly. Some avoided Marcus's eyes. A distant cough broke the tension. From the right side of the chamber, a young congresswoman raised her hand. She wore a white shirt, a congressional pin on her chest, and held her gaze steady. I disagree with how this hearing is being conducted, she said. We are not here to reenact a public execution, but to uncover what's been buried for 2 decades. Justice is not cornering a man betrayed by the system, but uncovering who betrayed him and why. She paused, then added, I request a postponement until the remaining witness appears. Silence returned, followed by hushed discussion among council members. A nod from the presiding chair confirmed the motion was approved. Marcus stood and turned to leave. A soft noise stirred from the rear. A man in uniform entered through the side door, head lowered, holding a briefcase. No one recognized him at first, until the light caught the insignia on his chest, the emblem of the very unit Marcus once commanded. He paused by the door as heads turned. In the heavy quiet, his grip on the briefcase tightened, as if it carried not only documents, but the pounding heart of a system about to be exposed. The hearing room doors opened for the 2nd time that day. No one spoke, but every head turned. The man who entered wore a crisp military uniform, its lapels still showing sharp creases, his sun-worn face carrying an air of unwavering determination. Some officers recognized him. Murmurs spread across the gallery. Someone leaned over and whispered, That's Darrell White, the one who was demoted for disobeying orders. A long-buried story had suddenly re-emerged like a boulder in a clear stream. Darrell paused for a beat under the weight of countless stares, then walked directly to the testimony stand. The presiding officer raised a hand and spoke firmly. Who are you? And in what capacity are you here? Darrell didn't look at the speaker. His eyes found Marcus, seated upright as always. He gave a subtle nod, a greeting, a confirmation. I'm a witness, he said clearly, and I bring the truth. Silence fell over the room, so deep that a falling pen could be heard. Darrell surveyed the council members seated before him and continued in the steady tone of a field report. I served under Commander Walker during Operation Velocity in 1997. After the operation, I was asked to sign a false report. I refused. Within 48 hours, I was discharged for failure to cooperate with internal investigation. He paused and pulled from his pocket an old military clearance badge. Holding it up, I was tasked with a covert assignment under a special code name by the Department of Strategic Security. My objective was to infiltrate and observe individuals within the system suspected of manipulating campaign records. Some faces in the room began to tighten, others quietly made phone calls. Darrell pressed on. I never betrayed anyone. I was ordered to get close to the very people you now sit beside. I dined with them, visited their homes, watched them backdate files. alter coordinates, and push my teammates onto the relocation list, which everyone knew meant permanent silencing. From his briefcase, he retrieved a small storage device. I recorded the meetings. I took photographs of edited reports. I copied tactical maps that had been altered. I saved video footage from surveillance stations, later blamed on weather malfunction. Everything is here. The large screen behind him lit up. Daryl pressed a button on the remote, and the first video played. The footage shook slightly, clearly shot by hand, but the audio was sharp. In the frame was a dimly lit office, a long table, and a general seated opposite two men in suits. A thick envelope and a folder sat on the table. The general spoke with unapologetic confidence. "This file must never appear on any platform. We are preserving the military's credibility." One of the suited men slid the envelope forward. "Credibility doesn't pay my salary," he said coldly. The video froze at the exact moment the general reached for the envelope. No one said a word. For several seconds, only the ceiling fan could be heard turning overhead. The presiding officer leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the now blank screen. Another council member bowed his head, fingers tightly interlocked, as if bracing against an internal storm. Daryl placed the storage device on the podium, his gaze calm but razor-sharp. "This is only part of it. The rest is secured in the original drive. I didn't preserve this evidence for revenge. I did it because I believed and still believe that our military deserves to be cleansed." Marcus remained still, unblinking. He didn't look at Daryl with surprise, but with recognition. In that shared gaze, the accusations that had hovered over both men finally began to fall upon the ones who deserved them. Daryl pressed another button, and the screen lit up again. A string of emails appeared. The subject line, "DeCampion, no trace." The message showed correspondence between three senior officers, one of whom was General Raber, sitting less than 2 rows away. A line projected in bold across the room. "The incident in Zone 4 must be wiped. June's tactical records need to be replaced before the inquiry committee finds them. Walker won't let this go. If necessary, use psychological trauma as a pretext to remove him from the system." A wave of shock swept through the chamber. A young senator slammed a hand on the table, anger burning in his eyes. Another whispered urgently to an aide. On the next slide was a side-by-side comparison of old and current tactical maps. Coordinates had been changed, erasing all evidence that could have implicated the artillery unit for firing under false orders. Daryl presented each fragment without commentary. The proof spoke for itself. He turned to the council, voice low and resolute. Everyone knew, but no one dared to speak. "I am the last person who still holds enough data to reconstruct the sequence. I'm not doing this for fame or recognition. I'm doing it for a man who shielded us all from being crushed by a rotten system." An audio clip played. A gruff voice delivered words like military commands. "Walker is hard to manage. He doesn't fall in line. If we must, use his war wounds to show he's mentally unfit for command. That unit needs to be erased from memory before it drags the whole system down." From the back left corner, someone gasped. General Rayburn stood abruptly but couldn't speak. An aide approached and whispered in his ear, urging him to sit. Sweat glistened on Rayburn's forehead as he gripped the chair's armrest. The presiding officer waited several seconds before tapping his gavel gently on the desk. He looked around, voice stern yet trembling. "This hearing will be expanded. What we've just seen is no longer a personal dispute. This is evidence of a system that has manipulated, concealed, and silenced the honest." Another council member stood and addressed Marcus. "Mr. Walker, I speak for myself and for the part of this system that stayed silent. We owe you an apology." Marcus did not move. His hands were folded in his lap. No smile, no nod, no triumphant gesture. His face relaxed slightly, eyes blinking softly. The relief he felt wasn't joy. It was the release of a burden he had carried invisibly for over 20 years. Daryl stepped down from the podium, past Marcus, and bowed his head. "I owe you my thanks for not losing faith in us, even when we let you fall." Marcus looked up and met his eyes. "I don't need thanks. I need it to continue." And for the first time since the hearing began, applause broke out. Scattered, sparse but genuine. That old soldier, once forced to kneel beneath a false system, now sat tall in the light, and truth at last found its place in a room long sealed by power. The announcement was released early in the morning through an internal communication channel of the Department of Defense. The headline was brief but explosive: expanded investigation into violations during Special Operation 1997, suspension of multiple high-ranking officials. Among those listed for immediate review was General Rayburn, the former commander in charge of the entire post-conflict tactical response network. A note was attached: indications of severe breaches in security protocol, manipulation of military data, and obstruction of interagency inspection efforts. Rayburn was summoned immediately after the hearing concluded. The press was not granted access, but internal sources confirmed that he was escorted out of the headquarters in silence. No medals, no farewells. At the same time, 3 other generals and 2 officials from the Office of the Inspector General were forced to step down. The hands that once controlled an entire operation fell like the final dominoes. 3 days later, a private ceremony was held in the back garden of an old military base, once the training ground of the 9th Brigade. There were no cameras, no public speeches, no banners. A middle-aged general representing the Department of Defense stepped forward and handed Marcus a small box containing a high command insignia and a sealed envelope bearing the minister's seal. He said nothing beyond the words, "The system owes you this." Marcus stood among the flags, dressed in a pressed ceremonial uniform, silver buttons reflecting the early morning sun. His face showed neither pride nor triumph, only calm, understanding, and, finally, closure. Around him stood old soldiers, men who had once crossed front lines with him, now forming a quiet circle. Some nodded, others bowed their heads. They all understood this moment was not for celebration, but for mourning a truth that had long been buried. A photo, taken by an internal staff member, accidentally or intentionally, was later posted on a veterans forum. In it, Marcus stood straight before the national flag, holding the wooden box, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Nothing spectacular, no media. Yet the image spread rapidly, accompanied by the caption, "Silenced for 2 decades, today he made the entire system listen." Over 1 million shares in 24 hours. Human rights organizations began calling on the Department of Defense to review all specially classified post-war records. A new movement emerged among younger veterans, demanding transparency in internal procedures and protection for whistleblowers. Analytical articles revisiting the 1997 operation appeared for the first time in mainstream media, and for the first time, Marcus Walker's name was mentioned with genuine respect. At the end of the day, Marcus stepped into the detention center where Sarah had been held for several weeks for inciting public opinion and leaking data. She waited in the visitation room, hair tied back, eyes darkened by fatigue but burning with vitality. When he sat down, she grasped his hand as if afraid it might vanish if she let go. They looked at each other in silence, no words of confirmation needed. Then she smiled, a simple, proud smile. "I knew you wouldn't let it end in silence." Marcus nodded slightly. His eyes softened for the first time in a long journey, and in Sarah's eyes there was something no longer youthful, something bearing the weight of memory, handed down to be protected and carried forward. Since the hearing, Marcus Walker's name appeared regularly on the front pages of major newspapers. Dozens of interview requests, from national television to documentary filmmakers, poured in. Some called him the last survivor of truth, others the silent legend, but every request received the same response: silence. A young journalist, more persistent than the rest, traced an old address and arrived at the house on the outskirts of McRae. She stood at the gate with a recorder, documents, and a production crew. Marcus looked at her through the window, said nothing for a few seconds. Then he came out, opened the gate, not with anger, not with coldness. He simply said, "I didn't live to tell the story. I lived so someone else could." Then he gently closed the wooden gate, leaving the young reporter frozen in the quiet southern sunlight. He returned to live in the old house, once sealed off when he was taken in for interrogation years ago. The roof was repaired, the old motorcycle stored in the shed and repainted. The dry lawn was replaced with vegetable beds and flower plots. Each morning he sat under the porch, sipping coffee, watching the sun rise over the eastern hills. Townspeople who once eyed him with suspicion now began to stop and nod. Some younger ones came by, asking about war, survival, and how to stay calm when the world turns against you. Meanwhile, Sarah became one of the most discussed names on military reform forums. Her first speech at the National Forum on Justice and Reconstruction exceeded all expectations. Standing before hundreds of politicians, lawyers, generals, and young citizens, her gaze was firm, her voice unwavering. If we don't speak for those who were silenced, one day we too will be broken without a name. The quote was reprinted and hung on the office walls of many NGOs. And for the first time, Sarah was no longer just Marcus Walker's granddaughter. She was a bold, independent voice, representing a generation unafraid to face history. It was his sister. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, Marcus wrote a letter by hand. He didn't write a recipient's name or a date. He sealed it in a yellow envelope and left it on Sarah's desk in the living room, where she often visited on weekends. The final line read, "Don't become me. Become what I never thought I'd live to see, someone who can tell the whole truth without fear." As the evening fell, Marcus sat under the porch as usual. A small radio beside him broadcast a brief news segment. The government had officially formed an independent committee to thoroughly review military records from the 1990s. A former veteran had been invited as advisor, his name withheld, but most could guess who it was. A breeze blew in from the west, sweeping across the porch. Marcus lifted his head, eyes half closed. For a brief moment, his face softened, lips curling into a faint smile. Not for others, but for himself. For the first time since the story began, a genuine smile. In a world where first impressions can determine a person's fate, the story of Marcus Walker raises a painful question. Do we see others through the lens of fairness or through the veil of prejudice? Marcus, an elderly black man living quietly in the town of McRae, was not a suspicious outsider as some suspicious eyes had assumed. He wasn't a drifter, nor a threat requiring police scrutiny or detention. He was a former elite commander, a man who had given his youth to defend the ideals of justice for his country, and he was betrayed. From being publicly humiliated to becoming the keeper of a corrupt system's darkest secrets, Marcus didn't retaliate with shouting. He didn't struggle to escape the weight of prejudice. He chose silence, the sharpest weapon in a society that is loud and quick to judge. That silence instilled fear in the system. That steady gaze, neither bowed nor broken under abuse of power, forced others to look inward. The first lesson from this story is a warning about the devastating power of prejudice. Prejudice isn't always a slur or insult. Sometimes it's a wary glance, a furrowed brow, the silence when witnessing injustice, but lacking the courage to speak out. Marcus wasn't pulled over for breaking the law. He was stopped because the color of his skin made others feel that something was off. Officer Luke Garrison's actions weren't merely personal. They represented a system conditioned to discriminate, to manipulate truth under the guise of legal authority. The second lesson is about the value of resilience and courage. Marcus could have chosen peace, burying his past and hiding the scars from 1997, the year he was deceived into leading a raid on a civilian area under the pretext of counterterrorism, but he chose to expose the truth, not for himself, but because justice deserved clarity and innocent souls deserved vindication. In a world where justice is often just a surface label, the courage to speak the truth is rare, and sometimes it costs one's entire life. The third, and perhaps most profound lesson, is this: justice does not die. It merely waits, silent, for someone to awaken it. Marcus was stripped of his rank, branded a traitor, and buried by a system that crushed both his honor and humanity. But truth cannot be killed. It survives in worn journals, in the memories of soldiers still alive, in the recollections of those who witnessed the corruption from within. And when enough people rise, when enough evidence surfaces, justice returns, without warning, without weapons. Through Marcus's story, we see reflections of countless real lives, those pushed aside for being different in race, gender, or social status. Talented, honest people are labeled as not suitable, simply because they didn't fit the mold. This is why the larger message of the story is not just a cautionary tale about social injustice, but a powerful call to action. We must learn to listen. We must learn to see others without the dust of prejudice clouding our vision. Have you ever been misunderstood or misjudged simply because others didn't take the time to know who you really are? Have you ever been dismissed, overlooked, because your appearance didn't match what society expects, even though inside you held talent, integrity, and purpose? Have you ever wanted to prove that you were not ordinary, not disposable, not invisible, but never had the chance to speak up? If your answer is yes, then Marcus is not just a fictional character, he is a symbol for millions who have endured the same. If this story made you think, share it, not to spread pain, but to spread the lesson. Speak the truth, even if it's just a story told, a post shared, or a moment when you chose to stand by someone vulnerable. Don't let silence become complicity. Don't let your eyes become invisible wounds on others. Be the one who speaks first, or at the very least the one who doesn't look away. We would like to express our deepest and most sincere gratitude to you, our incredible audience, for taking the time to follow and accompany us throughout this journey. Every view, every share comment, and every single subscription you've given is not just a number or a metric, but a tremendous source of motivation that drives us to keep improving, innovating, and delivering better content every day. We understand that in a world overflowing with information and endless choices, your decision to pause, listen, and connect with the stories we tell is no small matter. That is precisely what makes your presence all the more meaningful, complete, and invaluable to us. This channel was born from a singular desire to tell stories that are not only compelling, but also rich in depth, value, and the power to shift perspectives. These may be stories of people who were treated unfairly but never gave up, of those who fell but never lost themselves, or of hidden truths that finally came to light. Each story is a slice of life, a fragment of emotion, and we strive to piece it together with the utmost sincerity and responsibility. We assure you that what you've seen so far is only the beginning. In the coming time, our channel will continue to bring you even more fresh, powerful, and inspiring stories. We're expanding our content, enhancing our storytelling quality, and diving deeper into meaningful, timely topics so that each video becomes more than entertainment. It becomes an experience that touches thought and emotion alike. If our stories have ever made you pause and reflect, we hope you'll continue to support us by sharing them with the people who matter to you. And if there's anything you'd like to suggest or share, don't hesitate to leave a comment, because to us, you are more than just a viewer. You are a vital part of a growing community, helping us craft meaningful narratives together. Thank you once again for being here. We are grateful to you, and we promise to keep striving to be worthy of that.